My brother David came to visit me from Mexico and found my house empty, completely empty, without furniture, without food in the pantry, without anything. He looked at me with his eyes full of tears and asked, "Sister, why are you starving if you have a retirement of $8,000 a month?" Before I could answer, Daniel came out of his room, crossed his arms, and declared with a proud smile, "I give all her money to my wife. She manages it better than Mom." The silence that followed was deafening. David stood motionless, staring at my son as if he were a stranger. Then, very slowly, he took off his coat, folded it calmly, and what he did next left Daniel completely paralyzed. But to understand how we got to that moment, I must tell you my story from the beginning. My name is Elizabeth, and I am 69 years old. All my life, I worked as a nurse at the city's general hospital. It was 42 years of night shifts, of sleepless emergencies, of patients who cried in my arms. 42 years of giving my life to save other lives. My husband Richard died 11 years ago of a massive heart attack. It was so sudden there was no time for goodbyes. That morning, before leaving for work, he kissed me on the forehead and said, "I love you, Liz." I never imagined those would be his last words. The pain of losing him was so deep I thought I wouldn't survive. But I had a reason to go on. Daniel, our only son. He became the center of my universe. Everything I did, every extra hour I worked, every sacrifice I made was for him. So he could have a good education, so he wouldn't lack for anything, so he could fulfill his dreams. Daniel grew up to be a happy and affectionate boy. I remember when he was 8 years old and would wait up for me after my night shifts to give me a hug. "Mommy, you're the best nurse in the world," he would tell me in that sweet voice that melted my heart. He graduated from college with honors. He studied business administration, and I was so proud of him. I attended his graduation ceremony in my hospital scrubs because I came straight from an 18-hour shift. But I didn't care. Seeing my son receive that diploma was my greatest reward. Afterward, he got a good job at a logistics company. Everything seemed perfect. My son was a successful, responsible man with a future. Or at least that's what I believed. 3 years ago, Daniel met Morgan at a business conference. She worked in the marketing department of a rival company. She was an elegant woman, always impeccably dressed, with that kind of confidence that commands respect. When Daniel introduced her to me, I noticed something in her eyes that I couldn't decipher at the time. A calculating coldness behind her perfect smile. "It's a pleasure, Elizabeth," she said in a soft voice, extending her hand. "Daniel has told me so much about you." She was wearing an ivory-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary as a nurse. I tried to be kind, to give her the benefit of the doubt. After all, she was the woman who had won my son's heart. They married 6 months later, in a small but elegant ceremony. I paid for half the wedding with my savings, because I wanted Daniel to have the special day he deserved. Morgan had no close family. She said her parents had passed away and she was an only child. I felt sorry for her. I thought maybe her coldness was just a shield to protect herself from loneliness. I tried to get closer, to be the mother she never had. The first few months seemed happy. Daniel came to visit me every week, sometimes bringing Morgan. We shared Sunday lunch, and he would tell me about his work, his plans, his dreams. "Mom, I'm going to give you grandchildren soon," he promised one afternoon while helping me wash the dishes. "And you'll be the most spoiled grandmother in the world." My heart filled with hope. Life was moving forward, and I had so much to live for. But then, 14 months ago, everything changed. Daniel lost his job. The company he worked for shut down operations in our city and moved everything to another region. He came to my house that afternoon with a broken look on his face, his eyes red from crying. "Mom, I got laid off," he told me in a shattered voice. "I don't know what I'm going to do. I have debts, the apartment rent, Morgan's expenses." I hugged him like I did when he was a child and told him, "It's okay, my love. I'm here. We'll get through this together." And that's how my ordeal began, although at the time I called it a mother's love. Daniel and Morgan moved into my house 2 weeks after he lost his job. "It's just temporary, Mom," Daniel assured me as they brought in their suitcases. "Just until I find another job and we can get back on our feet." I was happy to help them. After all, What was my $8,000 a month retirement for, if not to support my son in difficult times? My house had 3 bedrooms, so there was plenty of space. I gave them the master bedroom, the one that had been mine and Richard's. I moved into the smallest one. "You're young and need the space," I told them with a smile. Morgan thanked me with a kiss on the cheek, but there was something about the gesture that felt empty, mechanical, as if she were performing for an invisible audience. The first few days were pleasant. We cooked together. I taught Morgan some traditional recipes that Daniel had loved since childhood. She seemed interested, took notes, asked me questions. "Elizabeth, you are so generous," she would say while stirring the pot. "Not every mother would do what you're doing for her son." Those words filled me with pride. I thought we were finally building a mother-daughter relationship, but there were small details that began to bother me. Morgan would look through the kitchen cabinets and make comments about what was missing. "We should buy new dishes, these are so old," she'd say, pointing to the plates Richard had given me for our 10th anniversary. Or she would walk into my room without knocking, saying she needed something from the closet that they had left there by mistake. Daniel spent his days sending out resumes and going to interviews. I gave him money for gas, for nice clothes, so he could buy a coffee while he waited. "Thanks, Mom," he'd say, taking the bills. "I promise I'll pay you back for everything when I find a job." Weeks went by, and the interviews yielded no results. Daniel's frustration was evident. He came home quieter each day, more distant. Morgan became the one who spoke for them both. "Elizabeth, Daniel is under a lot of stress," she explained to me in a soft voice. "The constant rejection is affecting him emotionally. He needs to feel like he can still provide for his family." Then she suggested something that seemed reasonable at the time. "Why don't you give Daniel your debit card? That way he can manage the household expenses and feel useful while he's looking for work." I hesitated for a moment. It was my money, my retirement earned with 42 years of work. But I looked at my son sitting on the sofa with a lost expression, and my heart broke. I wanted to help him regain his dignity. "All right," I said finally. "Daniel can manage the money while he's here." I gave him my card and explained my PIN. "Use what you need, son. For food, for your expenses, for whatever." Daniel hugged me tightly, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a smile on his face. "Thank you, Mom. You don't know what this means to me." Morgan smiled too, but her smile was different. There was a glint in her eyes that I didn't understand then. Now I know it was the glint of victory. The first few weeks seemed normal. Daniel went to the grocery store and brought back food. He paid the house bills on time. He even gave me $100 for my personal expenses. "Here, Mom, so you can buy yourself something nice," he said affectionately. I felt relieved. My son was responsible. He was managing the money well. But then, the subtle changes began. The grocery hauls started getting smaller. "Everything is so expensive, Mom," Daniel explained. "We have to economize until I get a job." It made sense, so I didn't question it. We stopped buying fresh meat and fish. Fruit disappeared from the pantry. "Canned vegetables are cheaper and last longer," Morgan would say as she prepared dinner. I nodded, trying to be understanding of the situation. But something strange was happening. While we were eating rice and beans, Morgan always had bags from expensive stores in her room. One day, I saw her trying on an emerald green dress that surely cost several $100s. "A friend gave it to me," she said quickly when she noticed me looking. It didn't fit her anymore, and she knew it was my size. Daniel also started wearing new clothes. Shiny shoes, brand-name shirts, a watch I didn't remember seeing before. "A friend lent them to me for interviews," he'd explain when I asked. "You have to look the part to get the job." His explanations always sounded logical, reasonable. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. 3 months passed, and Daniel still hadn't found a job. One day, I tried to check my bank account online to see how much money was left, but the password had been changed. "Daniel," I called. He came into the living room with a calm expression. "Oh, right, Mom. I changed the password for security. There's a lot of fraud going on." He gave me a new password, but when I tried to use it, it didn't work either. "Let me, Mom," he said, taking my phone from my hands. "You don't really get this tech stuff. I'll handle it." And just like that, slowly, I was losing access to my own money, to my own life. The following months were like falling into a dark pit I couldn't climb out of. Every day was a little worse than the last, but the changes were so gradual that I didn't realize how deep I had fallen until it was too late. Daniel and Morgan had completely taken over my house, my money, and my life. And I, like a fool, kept justifying every one of their actions because they were my family, because Daniel was my son, because a mother's love knows no bounds, right? But I was about to discover that some loves destroy you while you smile and say thank you. One day, I came into the living room and noticed the sofa was missing. The beautiful wine-colored velvet sofa that Richard and I had bought on our 20th anniversary. "Where is the sofa?" I asked, confused. Morgan was in the dining room, painting her nails. She didn't even look up. "We sold it," she answered, matter-of-factly. "It was so old and worn out. Besides, we needed the money for more important things." My heart hammered. More important things? What things? Daniel appeared from the kitchen with a beer in his hand. "Mom, don't worry about those details. I'm handling everything." But I was worried. That sofa held memories, history, meaning. "Daniel, that sofa belonged to your father and me. You had no right to sell it without asking me." My son looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. Cold, distant. "Mom, you're living in the past. It's just material stuff. Dad is gone, and clinging to old furniture isn't going to bring him back." His words hurt more than a slap. I tried to protest, but Morgan intervened in her sickly sweet voice. "Elizabeth, Daniel is right. You need to let go of the past and think about the future. Besides, we live here too, and we have a right to make decisions about the house." A right? In my own house? I wanted to scream at them that it was my house, my money, my memories. But the words got stuck in my throat. I was afraid that if I confronted them, they would leave, and I would be left completely alone. And loneliness terrified me more than anything in the world. So I swallowed my tears, nodded, and went to my room, feeling like a stranger in my own home. The following week, the dining room table disappeared. Then the antique lamps I had inherited from my mother. Then the living room television, although strangely, they had a new big-screen TV in their bedroom. "I got it on sale," Daniel explained when I asked. Every time I objected to something, the answer was the same. "Mom, trust me. I know what I'm doing." But I didn't trust him anymore. I started having nightmares where my house was completely empty, and I was walking through rooms that echoed with every step. The worst part was that those nightmares were becoming reality. My diet also worsened dramatically. The food portions became smaller and smaller. "Mom, at your age, you don't need to eat so much," Morgan would tell me, as she served me barely half a cup of rice and some watery beans. "Besides, didn't you want to lose weight? I'm doing you a favor." I didn't want to lose weight. I was at a healthy weight for my age and build. But Daniel backed his wife on everything. Morgan took an online nutrition course. He informed me proudly. "She knows what's best for you." She hadn't studied nutrition. I would find that out later. It was just another lie in a growing mountain of lies. While I ate rice and beans once a day, they ordered takeout almost every night. The smell of pizza, burgers, and Chinese food filled the house and made my stomach ache with hunger. "It's just that we're younger and need more energy," Morgan would explain without the slightest trace of shame on her face. I started to lose weight rapidly. My clothes hung off me. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the emaciated woman looking back. I had deep, dark circles, pale skin, and trembling hands. My friends from the hospital, the few who still visited, were worried. "Elizabeth, are you sick?" My best friend of 30 years, Susan, asked me. "You look so thin. Are you eating properly?" I opened my mouth to tell her the truth, to ask for help, but just then, Morgan walked into the living room with a radiant smile. "Elizabeth is perfectly fine. She's just on a healthy diet, right, Elizabeth?" She looked at me with eyes that promised consequences if I said anything different. I nodded weakly. "Yes, I'm fine. Just taking care of myself." Susan didn't look convinced, but she didn't press. When she left, I felt more alone than ever. One day, I tried to get money from the ATM with the card Daniel had given back to me for emergencies. I needed to buy my blood pressure medication. The machine rejected the transaction. Insufficient funds. Impossible. It was the middle of the month. There should have been at least $4,000 in the account. I tried again. The same message. With trembling hands, I requested a printed balance. The number on the paper made me gasp. $37.50. $37 from a monthly pension of $8,000. Where was the rest? I got home with the crumpled paper in my hand and looked for Daniel. He was in the yard talking on the phone, laughing about something. When he saw me, he ended the call quickly. "Daniel, I need to talk to you," I said in a shaky voice, showing him the bank slip. "There's only $37 left in my account. Where is my money?" His expression shifted from surprise to annoyance in a second. "Mom, you went to the bank without telling me? We talked about this. I managed the money so you don't have to worry, but I need to know where it is. It's $8,000, and there are only 37 left. What was it all spent on?" Daniel sighed as if he were dealing with a capricious child. "On food, on bills, on household expenses. Do you think everything is free? The lights, the water, the gas, the internet. It all costs money, Mom, but that couldn't cost almost $8,000. The utility bills are $500 a month at most. What about the other $7,500? Daniel, the bills don't add up to more than $500, I insisted, trying to stay calm even though my heart was pounding. Where is the other $7,500? My son looked at me with an expression of annoyance that chilled my blood. "Mom, you also have to pay for food, gas to go to interviews, clothes to look presentable. Or do you want me to go looking for a job in rags?" His tone was defensive, almost aggressive. He had never spoken to me like that. "But son, I'm not seeing that food. We barely have rice and beans in the house. And you've been here for 6 months without getting a job. Don't you think it's time we looked for another solution?" The words tumbled out of my mouth before I could stop them. I saw Daniel's face darken. Morgan appeared at that moment, as if she had been listening behind the door. "Another solution," Morgan repeated in a dangerously soft voice. "What are you implying, Elizabeth? That you want to kick us out? Your own son?" Her words sounded hurt, but her eyes shone with something darker. Malice. Calculation. "No, that's not it," I hurried to explain. "I just want to understand what's happening with my money. I have a right to know." Daniel took a step toward me. "You have a right," he said slowly, "but you also have an obligation to help your family. Or are we not your family anymore? After everything I did for you, after I took care of you when Dad died, now you're going to deny me your support." His argument was absurd. He hadn't taken care of me when Richard died. I was the one who had taken care of myself, who had worked double shifts to not think about the pain, who had carried on because I had to be strong. But I said nothing. I just stood there, holding that bank slip, as if it were evidence in a trial where I was the one accused. "Daniel is right," Morgan added, walking over to her husband and taking his arm. "You're being selfish, Elizabeth. We are going through a difficult time, and instead of supporting us, you're questioning us. Do you know what that does to Daniel? You're hurting him emotionally." The word selfish echoed in my head like a bell. Me? Selfish? I, who had given my entire life to my son, who had paid for his college, who had supported him in every decision, who had opened my home and given him full access to my money. I was the selfish one? Tears began to roll down my cheeks. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I didn't mean to. I'm just confused." Daniel sighed and patted me on the shoulder, like you console a dog. "It's okay, Mom. I know you're getting older, and it's hard for you to understand how things work now. That's why it's better for me to handle everything. You just rest and don't worry about the money." I went to my room feeling small, ashamed, guilty. They had made me feel like I was the problem. The following weeks were even worse. I realized I no longer had control over anything in my own life. I couldn't access my bank account. I couldn't buy even a pack of cookies without asking permission. Daniel controlled every cent. One day, I asked him for $20 to buy a birthday present for Susan. $20, he repeated as if I had asked for a fortune. "Mom, we don't have money for unnecessary expenses. Susan will understand, but it wasn't unnecessary to me." Susan had been my friend for 30 years. She had been by my side when Richard died. She deserved at least a birthday present. Please, Daniel, just $20. My son looked at me with that fed-up expression that was becoming more and more frequent. No, Mom, and don't insist because you're stressing me out. Do you know how hard it is for me to be unemployed? And on top of that, I have to deal with your whims. I stopped seeing my friends. Not because I didn't want to, but because I was ashamed for them to see me like this. Thin, emaciated, without a cent in my pocket. What was I going to tell them? That my own son had taken everything from me? When Susan called, I made excuses. I'm tired. I don't feel well. Some other time. Eventually, she stopped calling as often. I was isolating myself from the world and didn't even realize it was exactly what Daniel and Morgan wanted. A victim without witnesses is easier to control. The house became emptier and emptier. The framed photographs disappeared from the walls. I sold them on an app, Morgan explained. The antique frames are in fashion, and they paid well. They were photos of my wedding, of Daniel's baptism, of family Christmases. Irreplaceable memories reduced to cash I never saw. They took the Persian rugs I had inherited from my grandmother. They were full of dust mites, was the excuse. The paintings Richard had painted as a hobby took up too much space. Each object that disappeared took a piece of my history, of my identity, with it. I was being erased from my own life, one object at a time. My health deteriorated visibly. Besides the weight loss, I started to have constant dizzy spells. My blood pressure medication had run out weeks ago, and I had no money to buy more. Daniel, I need to go to the doctor, I told him one morning after nearly fainting in the bathroom. I feel very weak. My son didn't even look up from his phone. Doctors are very expensive, Mom. Besides, you're a nurse. You can take care of yourself. It was twisted logic. Yes, I was a nurse, but I was retired and sick. I needed professional medical attention, but my medication, I tried to explain. I already told you there's no money for that. He cut me off in a final tone. Learn to manage yourself better. Manage myself? I didn't have access to a single cent. How was I supposed to manage what I didn't have? One night, I woke up with my stomach twisting in hunger. I hadn't eaten anything all day, except a bit of stale bread in the morning. I got up and went to the kitchen, hoping to find something, anything. The pantry was practically empty. There was only one can of tuna and a package of crackers. I took the can with trembling hands and looked for the can opener. I was about to open it when I heard Morgan's voice behind me. What are you doing? I jumped so hard I almost dropped the can. I'm hungry, I said in a barely audible voice. Morgan snatched the can from my hands. This is for Daniel's lunch tomorrow. He needs protein to stay strong for his interviews. You already had dinner, but I hadn't had dinner. They had ordered Chinese food and hadn't offered me anything. I stood there, watching as Morgan put the can on a high shelf where I couldn't reach, and I felt like a prisoner in my own home. Because that's exactly what I was, a prisoner. The days blurred into a fog of hunger, weakness, and despair. I lost track of time. How long had Daniel and Morgan been living with me? 6 months? 8? A year? I didn't know. Everything blended together in my mind, confused by malnutrition. The only thing I knew for sure was that I was losing the will to fight. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just a useless old woman who didn't understand how the modern world worked. Maybe I deserved this. Those dark thoughts took hold of me more and more often. I was giving up on myself. But then, something happened that would change everything. My brother David decided to pay me a surprise visit from Mexico. David and I had always been close despite the distance. He had moved to Mexico City 15 years ago for work and had built his life there, but we always stayed in touch. We talked on the phone at least once a month, although I must admit that in recent months I had been avoiding his calls. I didn't want him to hear my weak voice, to ask me questions I didn't know how to answer. When I didn't answer, he left messages. Sister, are you okay? You have me worried. Call me. But I never returned the calls. Daniel was always nearby, listening, controlling. I didn't dare say anything that might upset him. David tried to contact Daniel directly. Your uncle is asking about you, my son would tell me in a bored tone after hanging up. I told him you're fine, just busy. But David wasn't stupid. My younger brother, 5 years my junior, had always been perceptive. He worked as an accountant for a large firm and had that ability to sense when the numbers didn't add up. And something about this whole situation wasn't adding up to him. After 2 months of not being able to speak to me directly, David made a decision. Without telling anyone, he bought a plane ticket and came to visit me. When he knocked on the door that Thursday afternoon, I was lying in my room, too weak to get up. Daniel opened the door and found him standing there, with a small suitcase and a determined expression. "Uncle David?" I heard Daniel's surprised voice from the living room. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see my sister," David replied in a firm voice. "Is she home?" There was an awkward silence. I wanted to get up, to go greet him, but my body wouldn't respond. I had spent 3 days eating practically nothing, and the dizziness was constant. "Yeah, she's here, but she's resting," Daniel said. "She's been a little under the weather lately." "Then it's a good thing I'm here," David retorted, and I heard his footsteps entering the house. "Which room is she in?" Daniel tried to stop him, but my brother was already walking down the hallway, opening doors. When he opened my bedroom door and saw me, his face completely transformed. I saw the shock, the horror, the disbelief in his eyes. "Elizabeth?" he whispered, as if he couldn't believe the skeletal woman lying on that bed was his sister. I sat up with difficulty. "David," I tried to smile. "What a surprise." But my voice came out broken, barely a whisper. My brother entered the room and knelt beside my bed. He took my hand, and I could see his eyes fill with tears as he felt how thin I was, how fragile my bones were under my skin. "Oh my God." "Sister, what happened to you?" he asked in a trembling voice. You're malnourished. You look." He didn't finish the sentence, but we both knew what he was going to say. I looked like a terminal patient. I looked like someone on the verge of death. "I'm fine," I lied out of reflex. "I've just been a little sick." David shook his head slowly, not letting go of my hand. "No, Elizabeth. This isn't a little sick. This is serious. Very serious." He stood up and walked out of the room. I followed him with my eyes, feeling a mixture of relief and terror. David had come. Someone had finally come. My brother walked through the house, and I could hear his steps, his muffled exclamations of shock. When he returned to my room, his expression was one of complete disbelief. "Elizabeth, where is your furniture? Your house is practically empty. There's no sofa in the living room, no table in the dining room, the walls are bare. What happened here?" Daniel appeared in the doorway with Morgan glued to his side. "Uncle, we're in the middle of a remodel," he explained in that smooth voice he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. "We sold some old furniture to buy more modern things later." David turned to him with a look I had never seen before. "A remodel? Your mother is lying on a bare mattress in a room with no heat, and you call this a remodel?" It was true. My bed was just a mattress with one thin blanket. I didn't even have a pillow. I had been sleeping with a rolled-up towel under my head. "Uncle, you're exaggerating," Daniel said, but his voice sounded less confident. David ignored him. He turned back to me. "Sister, when was the last time you ate?" The question caught me off guard. "Me? This morning?" I lied. But David knew me too well. He walked to the kitchen, and I heard him open the pantry, the refrigerator. He came back, his face flushed with barely contained rage. "There is no food in this house, Elizabeth. Absolutely nothing. Just 1 can of tuna and a package of expired crackers. How have you been eating?" I couldn't answer. The tears began to roll down my cheeks. David knelt beside me again, and in a very soft voice, as if speaking to someone wounded, he asked, "Sister, why are you starving? You have a retirement of $8,000 a month. You should be living comfortably. Where is your money?" Before I could answer, Daniel came out of his room. He must have been listening to the whole conversation. He crossed his arms and, with an expression that mixed pride and defiance, declared loud and clear, "I give all her money to my wife. She manages it better than Mom. Mom is old and doesn't understand modern finances. Morgan has an investment plan to make that money grow. It's for everyone's good. The silence that followed was absolute. David remained completely motionless, staring at Daniel as if he had just confessed to a crime. I felt as if ice-cold water had been thrown on me. My son had admitted, proudly, that he was taking all my money. Morgan appeared next to Daniel, taking his arm with a satisfied expression. "It's true, David. I'm investing Elizabeth's money intelligently. She gave it to us voluntarily for us to manage." David stood up very slowly. I saw his jaw clench, his hands ball into fists. But when he spoke, his voice was dangerously calm. "So you give all her money to your wife," he repeated, looking Daniel straight in the eyes. "And your mother is here, starving to death in her own home, while you and your wife keep her entire pension." "It's not like that, Uncle," Daniel began to say, but David held up a hand to silence him. "Shut up. I don't want to hear your excuses." He turned to Morgan. "And you? You say you're investing my sister's money. In what exactly? Because from what I can see, it's not in food. It's not in medication. It's not in keeping this house in decent condition." Morgan opened her mouth to answer, but David continued. "In fact, I want to see these supposed investments. I want to see bank statements, documents, proof of where every cent of the $8,000 a month my sister receives is, and I want to see them now." Daniel and Morgan exchanged a quick glance, and in that moment, I knew the truth. There were no investments. There was no financial plan. There was only theft, abuse, and manipulation. My brother knew it too. I saw his expression shift from controlled anger to something much colder and more calculated. David took off his coat very slowly, folded it carefully, and placed it on my bed. Then he took his cell phone out of his pocket and dialed a number. "Mark," he said when someone answered. "It's David. I need you to come to my sister Elizabeth's house immediately. Bring your recorder and your camera. And if you can, bring a doctor too." Mark was our family's lawyer for years. A serious, meticulous man who had handled our parents' will and some legal matters for David and me. I saw Daniel go pale. "Uncle, what are you doing?" he asked in a high-pitched voice. "This is a private family matter." David finished the call and turned to Daniel with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're right, Daniel. It is a family matter. A very serious family matter called elder financial abuse. And when Mark gets here, we are going to document every cent you've stolen, every piece of furniture you've sold, every meal you denied your mother. Everything." The word stolen hung in the air like an accusation. Daniel tried to protest. Morgan tried to explain. But David wasn't listening anymore. He sat on the edge of my bed and took my hand. "Sister," he said in a soft voice, "this is over. It all ends today." Daniel began to pace the room, running his hands through his hair nervously. "Uncle David, I think you're misinterpreting the whole situation," he said in a trembling voice. "Mom gave us permission to manage her money. She wanted to help us. Tell him. Mom, tell him you agreed to everything." All eyes turned to me. I felt the weight of that moment, the importance of what I was about to say. For months I had justified, I had forgiven, I had kept quiet. But as I looked at my son's pleading eyes and then at my brother's firm, loving eyes, something broke inside me. Something I had been holding back for far too long. "I gave you my card for temporary expenses," I said, my voice weak but clear. "I didn't give you permission to empty my account every month. I didn't give you permission to sell my furniture. I didn't give you permission to let me starve to death in my own house." The words came out like a flood I could no longer stop. "I gave you my card because you were my son and you were in trouble, because I trusted you, because I never imagined you would do this to me." My voice broke, but I continued. "I changed my whole life for you, Daniel. I worked double shifts to pay for your college. I gave up having a social life to be with you when you were a boy. I gave you everything I had, everything I was. And you paid me back by stealing my dignity." Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came out. Morgan stepped forward. "Elizabeth, you're confused. Age sometimes makes us remember things incorrectly." But David cut her off with a sharp voice. "Don't you dare treat her like she's senile. My sister is perfectly lucid, and you just heard her testimony." David stood up and walked toward Daniel. "While we wait for Mark, let's do a little exercise. You say Morgan is investing your mother's money. Fine, show me. Open your phone and show me the investment apps, the statements, the certificates, whatever. Daniel took a step back. I don't have to show you anything. You're not the police. You're right, I'm not the police, David replied with chilling calm. But they will be here soon if you don't cooperate, because what you've done to your mother isn't just immoral, it's illegal. It's called financial exploitation of the elderly, and it's a federal crime with penalties of up to 10 years in prison. I saw the color drain completely from Daniel's face. Morgan, on the other hand, maintained her composure, though I could see a flicker of panic in her eyes. This is ridiculous, Morgan said in a tense voice. We haven't committed any crime. Daniel is Elizabeth's son. Children have a right to receive help from their parents. Help, yes, David replied. Theft, no. There's a very clear line between asking for help and seizing every cent your mother-in-law receives while leaving her without food and medication. He turned to me. Sister, when was the last time you took your blood pressure medication? Almost 2 months ago, I admitted. Daniel said there was no money to buy it. David closed his eyes for a moment, as if containing an explosion of fury. No money for medication that cost $30 a month, but there was money for. He looked around the empty room. For what exactly? Where is the money, Daniel? My son slumped to the floor, sitting against the wall with his hands covering his face. We spent it, he mumbled. You spent it, David repeated. $8,000 a month for. How many months, Elizabeth? 14 months? I replied. They've lived here for 14 months. David took out his phone and quickly did the math. $112,000. You spent $112,000 of your mother's money in 14 months. On what? Daniel didn't answer. It was Morgan who spoke, and for the first time since I'd met her, her voice sounded genuinely scared. We had expenses. The rent on the apartment we still had the first year, credit card debts, the car. What apartment? David asked. Daniel and Morgan live here. We were still paying the lease on our old apartment, Morgan explained quickly. We moved out before the lease ended, and we had to keep paying until it expired. David looked at her in disbelief. And it didn't occur to you to sublet? To find someone to take the space? Or was it just more convenient to use my sister's money to pay for 2 homes while she slept on a bare mattress? Morgan had no answer for that. The credit card debts, David continued. How much are we talking about? $20,000, Daniel mumbled from the floor. $20,000, David repeated. And how did you accumulate $20,000 in debt? Silence was the answer. But I knew the answer. I had seen it with my own eyes over these months. The expensive clothes they wore, the expensive restaurants they brought leftovers from, Daniel's new watch glittering on his wrist, the designer handbags Morgan collected, the weekend trips they took while I stayed home alone. All of it had been with my money. The doorbell rang, and David went to open it. Mark entered with his professional briefcase and a serious expression. He was a man in his 50s, graying at the temples, with glasses and that calm but authoritative presence good lawyers have. Behind him was a woman I didn't recognize, carrying a medical bag. Elizabeth, Mark said, approaching my bed with obvious concern. David explained a bit on the phone, but, my God, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. My appearance spoke for itself. The doctor, who introduced herself as Dr. Evans, came over and began to examine me. She took my blood pressure, listened to my heart, checked my eyes and mouth. Her expression grew graver with each passing second. Mrs. Elizabeth, you are severely malnourished, she said in a professional but worried voice. Your blood pressure is dangerously high, you have signs of dehydration, and your body mass index indicates severe malnutrition. You need immediate medical attention. Did you hear that? David said, looking at Daniel and Morgan. Severe malnutrition. In a house where $8,000 comes in every month, Mark took a recorder out of his briefcase. With your permission, Elizabeth, I'm going to record this conversation. It's important to document everything that has happened. I nodded weakly. Mark turned on the recorder and began. It is Thursday, February 22nd, at 4:30 in the afternoon. Present at the residence of Mrs. Elizabeth R. Mrs. Elizabeth, her brother David, her son Daniel, her daughter-in-law Morgan, attorney Mark Henderson, and Dr. Sonia Evans. He looked at Daniel and Morgan. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I strongly advise you to answer honestly. Everything you say will be recorded and can be used in future legal proceedings. Daniel stood up, trembling. We didn't do anything wrong. My mother gave us her money voluntarily. Voluntarily? Mark asked skeptically. Did you ask your mother if she agreed to go without food, without medication, without furniture? She could ask for whatever she needed, Morgan chimed in defensively. It's not our fault if she didn't ask. She didn't ask? David's voice was like thunder. My sister asked you for $20 to buy her best friend a birthday present, and Daniel refused. She asked you for money for her medication, and you refused. How dare you say she didn't ask? Mark held up a hand to calm the room. Daniel, Morgan, I need you to hand over all the bank statements for the last 14 months. I need to see exactly where every cent of the $112,000 you received from Elizabeth's pension went. We don't have to give you anything, Daniel said, but his voice lacked conviction. Technically, no, Mark admitted. But if you don't cooperate voluntarily, I will file a formal complaint with the district attorney's office tonight for elder financial abuse, misappropriation of funds, and possibly fraud. And then it will be federal investigators reviewing your accounts, with a court order. And I assure you, they are much less polite than I am. I saw Daniel and Morgan look at each other, communicating silently. Finally, Morgan sighed. Fine. We'll show you the statements. She took out her phone with trembling hands and began opening apps. David and Mark moved closer to see the screen. What they saw left them in silence for a long moment. Then David whispered, My God. What? I asked weakly. What did you see? David turned to me, his face a mask of utter disbelief. Sister, there are transfers from your account to a business account in Morgan's name. A business account. She opened a business with your money. David's words fell on me like stones. A business. Morgan had opened a business with my money. My pension, earned with 42 years of work as a nurse, endless night shifts, patients I had cared for with my own hands. All that sacrifice had been used to finance the business of the woman who was starving me. What kind of business? Mark asked in a controlled voice as he took notes in a legal pad. Morgan didn't answer. She kept her gaze fixed on the floor. Her previous confidence was completely gone. It was Daniel who spoke, his voice barely audible. A clothing boutique. Morgan always wanted to have her own store. A boutique, David repeated slowly, as if processing something incomprehensible. You let your mother go without food, without medication, without furniture, selling her family heirlooms, so your wife could fulfill her dream of owning a clothing store. It wasn't like that, Morgan protested, looking up for the first time, her eyes shining with tears. I was going to pay her back all the money when the business started making a profit. It was a temporary investment. An investment. Mark's voice was dangerously soft. Did you ask Elizabeth for permission to invest her entire pension in your personal business? Morgan shook her head. Daniel said she would be okay with it. That she would understand. Daniel said, Mark repeated, writing meticulously, but you never directly asked Elizabeth if you could use her money to open a business in your name. No, Morgan admitted in a broken voice. Mark turned to Daniel. And you? Did you tell your mother that you were using her entire pension to finance your wife's business? Daniel didn't answer. His silence was all the response we needed. David started reviewing more details on Morgan's phone, swiping through the screen with an increasingly dark expression. Here's a transfer for $3,000 for initial inventory. Another for $2,500 for store renovation. $1,200 for logo and brand design. $4,000 for imported merchandise. Period. With every figure he mentioned, I felt needles stabbing my heart. And here, David continued, are personal purchases. An $800 dress. $600 shoes. A $1,200 handbag. Dinners at restaurants that cost $200, $300 a night. He turned to Morgan with a look of absolute contempt. While my sister ate watery beans once a day, you spent $1,200 on a handbag. Morgan began to cry openly. I needed to look good for the business. Customers judge by appearances. If I didn't look successful, no one would buy from my store. And my mother? I asked, in a voice I barely recognized as my own. A voice filled with a pain so deep, it seemed to come from the center of the earth. Didn't she need to look good? Didn't she need to eat? Didn't she need her medication? Morgan couldn't look me in the eye, I thought. Daniel said you had savings, that you had other accounts. I laughed. It was a bitter, broken laugh that hurt my chest. Other savings? Where would I get other savings? I spent all my savings on Daniel's college, on his wedding, on helping you when you needed it. My pension was all I had, and you knew it. Mark continued to review the phone, now cross-referencing with a tablet where he was running calculations. According to what I'm seeing here, of the $112,000 that came into this house in 14 months, approximately $93,000 was transferred directly to Morgan's accounts for her business and personal expenses. $93,000. The figure was so large I couldn't process it. And the other $19,000? David asked. Daniel cleared his throat. We paid for the old apartment for 6 months until the lease ended. That was about $1,500 a month. $9,000 in total. Then there are the credit card debts we had before we moved in here. We were paying them off slowly, with my sister's money, while she was starving. David's voice trembled with rage. Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you have the slightest idea? Dr. Evans, who had been taking my vitals again, intervened. Mr. David, I need to get Mrs. Elizabeth to the hospital immediately. Her condition is critical. She needs intravenous hydration, supervised nutrition, and a full evaluation. If she doesn't receive urgent medical care, she could suffer organ failure. No, I said firmly. Despite my weakness, all eyes turned to me. I'm not going to the hospital until this is settled. I need to hear everything. I need to know the whole truth. David knelt by my bed and took my hand. Sister, you're very sick. I know, I replied, but I've been sick for months, and I survived. I can hold on for a few more hours. I need to know what else they hid from me. My brother looked at Dr. Evans, who nodded reluctantly. All right, but no more than 1 hour. After that, I insist on taking her to the hospital, with or without her permission. Mark pulled more documents from his briefcase. Daniel, Morgan, I need you to sign an affidavit admitting to receiving Elizabeth's pension money and how you spent it. This statement will be used to determine the next legal steps. And if we don't sign? Daniel asked, with one last attempt at defiance. Then I proceed immediately with the criminal complaint, Mark replied without emotion. And believe me, you will want to resolve this in the civil arena before it becomes a criminal case. Elder financial abuse is a federal crime. We are talking years in prison, not fines. I saw the color drain from Daniel's face. Morgan was sobbing uncontrollably. We didn't mean to hurt her, she cried. We just wanted to get ahead. We just wanted a chance. At my sister's expense? David asked harshly. Was that your chance, to starve a 69-year-old woman? Enough, I said, with more strength than I thought I had. I want to ask questions. Everyone fell silent and looked at me. Daniel, my voice trembled. But I needed to know. At any point during these 14 months, did you stop to think about me? When you saw me getting thinner, weaker? When you sold your father's sofa? When you denied me money for my medication? Did you ever, for one moment, think, this is wrong? My son couldn't hold my gaze. Morgan said it was temporary, that soon everything would be fine. Morgan said, I repeated, Daniel, you are my son. You have known me since the day you were born. I held you in my arms. I fed you when you were hungry. I cared for you when you were sick. And you couldn't see that I was hungry? That I was sick? Tears began to stream down Daniel's face. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. Are you sorry? My voice rose despite my weakness. Are you sorry you got caught? Or are you sorry you did this to me? Daniel dropped to his knees by my bed. I'm sorry I failed you. I'm sorry I hurt you. I didn't want to. Things just got out of control. Every time I wanted to stop, Morgan said just 1 more month, just a little more money, and then we could pay you back everything with interest. I turned to Morgan. And your boutique? Is it working? Is it generating those profits you were going to use to pay me back? Morgan shook her head, sobbing. It went bankrupt 2 months ago. It failed. I lost everything. The silence that followed was absolute. It was David who spoke. So you didn't just steal $93,000 from my sister. You lost it. All that money, all that suffering, for nothing. Mark snapped his notebook shut. Well, now that we have all the information, these are the next steps. Daniel and Morgan will sign an agreement acknowledging the $93,000 debt to Elizabeth. They will establish a legally supervised payment plan. Furthermore, they will vacate this house immediately. Immediately? Daniel asked, his voice sharp. Where will we go? That is not my problem, Mark replied coldly. You should have thought of that before you stole from your mother. You have 2 hours to pack your personal belongings and leave the property. If you do not do so voluntarily, I will call the police and have you forcibly removed. Daniel looked at David, pleading, Uncle, please. We're family. David looked at him with an expression I will never forget. It wasn't anger. It was deep disappointment, sadness, and something that looked like pity. Family doesn't do this, Daniel. What you two did. It has no name. Daniel tried to approach me, but David stepped between us. No, my brother said firmly. You've done enough damage. My son stopped, his hands outstretched toward me in a gesture of supplication. Mom, please, forgive me. I love you. I know I made a terrible mistake, but I'm still your son. You can't just leave me on the street. His words should have moved me. For 69 years, Daniel had been my reason for living, my purpose, my everything. But as I looked at him standing there, crying and begging, I felt something I never thought I would feel for my own child. Nothing. The love I had felt for him my entire life had evaporated, consumed by months of hunger, humiliation, and betrayal. You left me to starve in my own home, I said, my voice broken but firm. I'm not leaving you on the street. I gave you a roof, food, all my money, and you decided that my life was worth less than a clothing boutique. Mom, I can fix this, Daniel insisted desperately. I'll get a job. I'll pay you back every cent. Just give me a chance. A chance, I repeated with a bitter laugh. I gave you 14 months of chances. Every day I woke up hungry. Every night I shivered from cold because you'd sold my blankets. Every time I asked you for something and you denied me. Those were all chances for you to do the right thing. And you never did. Morgan approached too, falling to her knees in front of me. Elizabeth, I know we don't deserve your forgiveness. But please, don't leave us with nothing. Daniel won't survive on the street. He's your only son, your only family. I am her family. David interjected harshly. I'm the one who came to save her when her only son was slowly killing her. He turned to Morgan with contempt. And you have no right to ask for anything. You orchestrated all of this. You convinced Daniel to steal from his own mother to finance your business fantasies. That's not true, Morgan protested weakly. Daniel wanted the business too. He agreed to everything. Daniel looked at her with betrayal on his face. What? No, you were the one who insisted on using my mother's money. You said it was just a loan, that she would never know because we'd pay it back before she noticed. You never stopped me, Morgan screamed, getting to her feet. You spent the money too. You bought expensive clothes and ate at fancy restaurants while your mother was starving. And there it was, the ugly, naked truth. They were blaming each other, destroying their own marriage right in front of my eyes. A part of me should have felt satisfied, watching their relationship crumble. But I just felt a deep, painful emptiness. This was my son. The baby I had held in my arms, the little boy who had told me I was the best mom in the world, the young man I had been so proud of. When had he become this stranger, capable of such cruel crimes? Mark hit the table with his fist, silencing the argument. Enough. I am not interested in who had the idea or who is more guilty. You are both equally responsible under the law. Now, are you going to sign these documents, or am I going to call the police? Decide. He pulled several papers from his briefcase and placed them on the only table left in the room. Daniel and Morgan approached slowly, reading the documents with expressions of defeat. This says we have to pay $1,500 a month until the full debt is covered, Daniel read in a shaky voice. That's more than 5 years of payments. You should consider yourself lucky, Mark replied unsympathetically. The alternative is prison. And believe me, you won't be able to pay a cent from there. But I don't have a job, Daniel protested. How am I supposed to pay $1,500 a month without a job? That is your problem, not mine, Mark said. You'll get a job, 2 jobs if necessary. 3. I don't care, but you will pay back every cent you stole from your mother. Morgan picked up the pen with a trembling hand. And if we can't pay 1 month? What happens then? Then the agreement is automatically voided, and I proceed with criminal charges, Mark explained. This document is your only chance to avoid prison. I suggest you take it seriously. I watched as Morgan and Daniel exchanged looks of desperation. Finally, they both signed the documents. Mark reviewed them carefully, ensuring every page was signed and dated correctly. Good, he said, putting the documents back in his briefcase. Now, according to the terms you just signed, you have 2 hours to leave this property. You may take only your personal belongings. Nothing that belongs to Elizabeth. None of the furniture, even if it's just 3 chairs and a table. None of the appliances. Just your clothes and personal items. Daniel looked around the almost empty house with a lost expression. Where will we go? You can go to friends, family, find a shelter, rent something. It's not my problem, David replied. You should have thought of that before. Morgan began to walk toward their room, sobbing. Daniel followed her with slow, defeated steps. As they packed, I could hear their muffled voices arguing in the room, blaming each other, crying. Part of me wanted to feel pity, but every time that feeling started to surface, I remembered the nights of hunger, the dizziness from lack of food, the humiliation of having to ask for $20 and being denied. I remembered watching them eat while my stomach growled. I remembered every small cruelty, every lie, every moment they chose their comfort over my survival. No, I didn't feel pity. I felt justice. David sat beside me and took my hand. Sister, when they're gone, I'm taking you straight to the hospital. Dr. Evans says you need at least a week of hospitalization to stabilize. I don't want to stay here after, I whispered. This house has too many bad memories now. I know, David replied softly. That's why, when you get out of the hospital, you're coming to live with me in Mexico City, at least temporarily, until you've fully recovered. Then, if you want to come back here, we'll renovate your house. We'll fill it with life again. But first, you need to heal. Tears rolled down my cheeks. Thank you, David. If you hadn't come. He shushed me. I will always be here for you. You're my sister. I should have come sooner. I should have insisted more when you didn't answer my calls. I feel guilty for not realizing what was happening. It's not your fault, I said, squeezing his hand. They were very careful. Every time I tried to ask for help, Daniel was nearby. Every time someone called, he answered and said I was fine. He isolated me completely. Mark, who had been reviewing more documents, looked up. Elizabeth, there's something else I need to tell you. When I reviewed the transfers in more detail, I found something disturbing. There are several documents that were digitally signed in your name. Authorizations for large transfers, changes to insurance beneficiaries, a power of attorney. My heart stopped. A power of attorney? I never signed any power of attorney. I know, Mark said with a grave expression. That's why I'm going to need you to file a formal complaint for document forgery. Daniel forged your signature on several important legal documents. That is an additional crime, much more serious than financial abuse. What documents? I asked, feeling nauseous. A power of attorney that gave Daniel total control over all your accounts and financial decisions. A change to your life insurance policy where Daniel and Morgan are now the sole beneficiaries, instead of the distribution you previously had among Daniel, David, and some charities, and an authorization to sell this house if necessary. The words hit me like hammers. They were going to sell my house. Mark nodded. There was a preliminary application with a real estate agency dated 3 weeks ago. They were preparing to sell it. They were probably going to tell you it was necessary for some invented medical or financial emergency. I felt as if the whole world was collapsing around me. They hadn't just stolen from me. hadn't just starved me. They had planned to take everything. My house, my life insurance, my complete autonomy. They would have left me with literally nothing. And how much would they have gotten for the house? David asked, his voice trembling with fury. According to the preliminary appraisal they requested, approximately $250,000, Mark replied. David shot to his feet so fast his chair fell over. "Daniel!" he yelled, stalking toward the room where my son was packing. Mark and I followed, me leaning on the walls as my legs could barely hold me. David threw the door open and found Daniel folding clothes into a suitcase. "You were going to sell your mother's house," David roared. "You were going to leave her literally on the street." Daniel went pale. We were just exploring options. We never would have done it without her permission. "Liar," David shouted. "You forged her signature on legal documents. You changed her life insurance. All without her knowledge or permission." Daniel started crying again, but these weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of panic, of someone watching their world fall apart. "Uncle, please." I was desperate. Morgan said we needed more capital to save the business. I thought if we sold the house, we could buy Mom something smaller and use the difference to invest. She would have been better off. "I swear." "Better off?" I repeated, in a voice I didn't recognize as my own. "Better off without a roof?" "The house your father and I bought with so much sacrifice." I walked toward Daniel. Every step was a monumental effort. "Look at what you did to me," I said, motioning to my emaciated body. "This is what better off under your care looks like. I weighed 60 kilos when you moved in. Now I weigh 42. You took 18 kilos from me. Almost all my strength, my dignity, my will to live. And still, you plan to take more." Daniel fell to his knees in front of me, sobbing uncontrollably. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I lost my way. I lost sight of what was important. Please, give me another chance. I can change." I looked at him for a long moment. I saw the broken man in front of me, but I also saw the boy he had been, the son I had loved with every fiber of my being. And in that instant, I made the hardest decision of my life. "No," I said, my voice firm despite the tears rolling down my cheeks. "I'm not going to give you another chance. Not because I don't love you, Daniel, but precisely because I love myself. And for the first time in my life, I am going to choose me." I saw his eyes widen in shock, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "For 69 years, I put everyone before myself. Your father, you, my patients, everyone. And when I needed someone to put me first, my own son chose money. He chose a clothing store. He chose his comfort over my life." "Mom, please," Daniel begged, reaching for me. I took a step back. "No, it's over. You signed the documents, you're going to pay your debt, and after that, I don't want to see you again." The words came out of my mouth with a clarity that surprised me. Daniel froze. "Never? You don't want to see me ever again?" "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "Maybe someday, when I've healed, when I can think of you without feeling this pain in my chest. But right now, every time I look at you, I see the months of suffering. I see every lie, every manipulation, every moment you chose to hurt me. I can't have that in my life. Not if I want to survive." David came over and put his hand on my shoulder, giving me strength. "Sister, the doctor insists we have to go to the hospital now." I nodded. "Yes, it's time." I turned one last time to Daniel and Morgan. "You have 1 hour to be gone. When I come back from the hospital, I don't want to find a single trace of you here." Morgan, who had been silent this whole time, finally spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Elizabeth, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I will spend the rest of my life regretting what I did. You didn't deserve any of this." I looked her straight in the eye. "You're right. I didn't. But it happened. And now you will both have to live with the consequences of your decisions. Just as I will have to live with the scars you left me." David helped me walk to the door. Every step was an effort, but it also felt like a step toward freedom. Dr. Evans was waiting for me in the living room with a wheelchair. "It's best if you don't walk any more for now," she said with gentle professionalism. I sat in the chair, feeling how fragile my body had become. As David pushed me toward the exit, I heard Daniel's sobs behind me. I didn't look back. If I looked back, I might break. And I had been broken enough. The hospital was a whirlwind of exams, blood tests, IV drips, and worried doctors. I was admitted immediately to intensive care. My blood pressure was dangerously high. My kidneys were showing signs of damage from prolonged dehydration, and I had severe anemia and critical vitamin deficiencies. Mrs. Elizabeth, the doctor in charge, told me, a man in his 40s with a grave expression, "You came in just in time. 1 or 2 more weeks in those conditions, and you likely would have suffered multiple organ failure." The words hit me hard. I had been that close to death, that close, and my own son had been the one to lead me to that edge. I spent 9 days in the hospital. David was with me every day, bringing me flowers, reading me books, or just holding my hand when the nightmares woke me up in the middle of the night. Susan came to visit, crying when she saw my condition. "Elizabeth, I should have insisted more," she said through her tears. "I saw something was wrong, but I didn't push hard enough." "It's not your fault," I assured her. "They were very careful. They isolated me systematically. But I'm free now." During those days in the hospital, Mark worked tirelessly on my case. He filed a formal complaint for elder financial abuse, document forgery, and misappropriation of funds. He also began the process of reversing all the forged documents, the power of attorney, the change to my life insurance, everything. "There's good news," he told me during one of his visits. "The bank is cooperating fully. They are going to review every suspicious transaction from the last 14 months. And since we found evidence of signature forgery, we may be able to recover some of the stolen money." "How much?" I asked, without much hope. "It's hard to say. Maybe $20,000 or $30,000. The rest was spent in cash or on the business that already failed. But something is better than nothing. David took care of my house while I was hospitalized. He hired a deep cleaning crew, bought new furniture, and filled the pantry and refrigerator with food. When you come back, I want you to find a home, not an empty house full of painful memories," he explained. But I had already made a decision. "David, I want to sell the house," I told him one afternoon as I was being fed through a feeding tube because my stomach still couldn't tolerate solid food. "It has too many ghosts now. I want to start over somewhere else." My brother nodded understandingly. "Where would you like to live?" "With you," I replied. "If you'll have me, I want to go to Mexico City. Start a new life far away from here, far from everything that happened." David smiled through tears. "Nothing would make me happier, sister. My home is your home." That decision filled me with a peace I hadn't felt in months. It was the closure I needed. Daniel tried to visit me at the hospital twice. Both times, he was denied entry. I had given specific instructions that I did not want to see him. He left letters at the front desk, which David collected but I did not read. "Do you want me to read them to you?" my brother asked. "No," I replied firmly. "Maybe someday, but not now." In the 3rd week after that terrible day, I was discharged from the hospital. I had gained 4 kilos, my vital signs had stabilized, and although I was still weak, the doctors were confident I would make a full recovery with time and proper care. David took me to my house one last time to gather some personal belongings before we moved to Mexico. When I walked in, I barely recognized the place. New furniture, freshly painted walls, framed photographs in places of honor. My brother had transformed the empty house back into a home, but I knew it wasn't my home anymore. My home was where I felt safe, valued, and loved. And that place was now with David. I packed only the essentials. Photographs of Richard, a few keepsakes from when Daniel was a child and still innocent, my nursing certificates, letters from grateful patients. I left behind everything that tied me to the pain. Mark handled the sale of the house and set up a trust to manage the money from the sale and the payments Daniel and Morgan were required to make. "You won't have to worry about a thing," he assured me. "I'll oversee everything and send you monthly reports." 3 months later, settled in David's home in Mexico City, I received news. The house had sold for $230,000. With that money and my recovered pension, I was financially secure again. Daniel and Morgan had made their first payment of $1,500, though Mark said they made it just 1 day before the deadline. It will take them 6 years and 2 months to pay off the full debt if they keep up the payments, Mark informed me. And if they don't pay? I asked. Then I proceed with criminal charges, as the agreement states. Slowly, I began to rebuild my life. I made new friends in Mexico, women my age who met at a book club David helped me find. I started therapy with a psychologist specializing in trauma and family abuse. The sessions were difficult, painful, but necessary. What you experienced is called financial abuse and extreme neglect, the doctor explained during one session. It is a form of violence just as real as physical violence. And it was not your fault. Those words freed me from the guilt I had been carrying. It had not been my fault. I had been the victim, not the one responsible. I gradually gained weight until I reached 58 kilos, a healthy weight for my age and height. My hair, which had started to fall out from malnutrition, grew back. The deep worry lines on my face softened. I began to smile again, to laugh, to live. 1 year after that terrible day when David knocked on my door and saved my life, I was sitting on the balcony of his apartment in Mexico City, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise. The sun painted the sky in shades of coral and gold, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Mark. Daniel has made 12 consecutive payments. Total paid so far, $18,000. $75,000 remaining. I read it without feeling anything in particular. Not satisfaction, not anger, not sadness, just acceptance. Daniel was paying his debt, literally and figuratively. In the message, there was also a note. Daniel asks if he can write you a letter. He says he is in therapy and that part of his recovery process is to apologize properly. I thought about it for a long time. Finally, I replied, he can send the letter. I will read it when I'm ready. And I meant it. Someday, when my heart was fully healed, maybe I could read his words. Maybe I could even forgive him. But that day had not yet come. And that was okay. I had all the time in the world. David came out onto the balcony with 2 cups of hot chocolate. "What are you thinking about, sister?" he asked, sitting next to me. I smiled. About how lucky I am to have you. About how grateful I am to be alive. About all the beautiful things I still have ahead of me. My brother put his arm around me. And I'm grateful you survived. That you're so strong. We sat there together, watching the sun finish rising, painting a new day full of possibilities. I had lost a lot. Money, furniture, the relationship with my son, the innocence of believing that family love was unconditional. But I had gained something more valuable. I had found myself. I had discovered that I deserved respect, dignity, and love. That I didn't have to accept abuse from anyone, not even my own blood. The morning breeze touched my face, and I closed my eyes, breathing deeply. For the first time in over a year, I felt free. Completely, wonderfully free.